Hi, welcome to my Upper Karazhan guide. In this guide, I'll be breaking down all the abilities of all enemies you will face in a typical route in this dungeon. I'll be uploading the VODs seen in this video separately if you wish to see those. I'll also be uploading a routes video for Upper Kara in the future, so be sure to subscribe if you wish to see that. Just like with my previous guides, I'll be marking important or impactful mob abilities in red, and non-important or low damaging abilities in green. Upper Karazhan in its current state is a difficult dungeon, with bosses like Shade of Medivh and Mana Worm to prove to be difficult walls, in addition to the hard-hitting mobs scattered throughout the dungeon. Understanding the abilities of your enemies you face will allow you to counter them better. Without further ado, let's begin. The dungeon starts with two Forlorn Spirits in a broken down part of the tower. You want to pull them together and defeat them. Note that one of them is Viz'aduum. The Forlorn Spirit has two abilities. Shadow Rend is where they apply a dot to their current target. Note that if the tank isn't near enough to the Forlorn when this is cast, it is instead applied to another nearby player. You'll need to dispel this healers. Her other ability is Soul Leech, where she drains health from all nearby players. Interrupt this to ensure that she doesn't heal. You then make your way up the steps to fight another ghost, a Shrieking Terror. On Keystones level 10 and above, she transforms into Zulgamux, the mini-boss for Season 4's Affix. Should you be doing a key lower than 10, I'll run you through her abilities briefly. Her first ability is Cursed Touch, which applies a curse to a player. This needs to be decursed or healed through. Her second ability is Terrifying Wail, which fears player if the cast goes through. You'll need to interrupt this. Entering the tower once again, you face two damaged Golems. I opt to pull both of them at once here because of a nifty trick you can do to avoid their primary ability, Unstable Energy. They channel for 6 seconds and unleash a barrage of arcane explosions around them. Standing in these explosions when they land will almost certainly kill you. However, you can stand to the side of the stairs here. Standing here, not a single explosion will land on you, and you can freely attack these golems. If you're not going to be standing here, I recommend only pulling one of these, and picking up count elsewhere in the dungeon. Past that, you face an Abstract Nullifier. He has several abilities. Two are directed at the tank. The first is Arcane Strike, where he instantly strikes his current target with arcane damage. The second is Force Blade, where after a short cast, he strikes the tank with arcane damage, and the tank will continue to burn for arcane damage over 10 seconds. As for the other players, he casts Nullification, silencing and disarming them for 30 seconds. To unsilence and rearm yourself, you'll have to find this image of a mage surrounded by floating orbs and walk through it. Walking through it also grants you a 100% attack and healing increase buff, so it's actually a good thing to get nullified. It is possible, should your tank and healer be capable enough, to pull this along with some trash in the Curator's Hallway, as this attack buff severely increases the lethality of your team. But that is a unique strategy that is best if your entire group is in on it. In the Hallway of the Curator are 4 packs of mobs consisting of a total of 4 mana confluences and 11 mana gorged worms. You should pull these out of the boss hallway back to where you came from to avoid pulling the boss. Note that the boss will reset after he exits the hallway, so if you happen to aggro the boss, you can pull him out to reset him. The first enemy here are the mana confluences. They start with a shield of relatively moderate size through Ablative Shield. While this shield is up, the mana confluences are immune to interrupts. However, the fact that they can be interrupted is rather irrelevant, because they run out of mana faster than you can break the shield. Their other ability is Arcane Barrage, where after a 2-second channel, they throw out an Arcane Barrage in the direction of the players. The Arcane Barrage itself does significant damage. However, they quickly drain the mana of these confluences. Once drained, these confluences become a grunt, only really meleeing the tank. They have no way of restoring their mana. As a result, the only danger here is the high initial incoming damage as you pull the pack. Just know that the damage tapers off as you continue this pull. The other enemy here is the Mana Gorged Worms. They only have one ability, Siphon Energy. They siphon the mana from nearby lingering mana pools. But there is only really one source of mana pools in this area, which would be the ones dropped by other mana worms when they die through loose mana. The worms don't actually do anything with that mana though, so they're basically just grunts. And if you're wondering, the mana confluences are unable to siphon from these pools, so they cannot refill their mana to cast more arcane barrages. This means that most of these packs are relatively harmless, with the exception of the arcane barrages at the start, so pull with caution. After these packs, you enter the hallway and fight the Curator for real. The Curator is a simple boss fight, with heavy emphasis on group movement. The Curator has 3 abilities. The first is Summon Volatile Energy, where Volatile Energy is summoned near a random player. Volatile energies are dangerous, and become more so if they're left alive for a long duration. They cast Arc Lightning, shooting lightning at a random player, and granting themselves a buff, which increases the damage of future Arc Lightnings. Generally, you don't want 2 of these energies up at the same time, and you absolutely cannot afford to have 3 up at the same time. Volatile energies also cast Static Charge at their current target, leaping to them and dealing some damage to that target and players within 8 yards. Non-tanks will have to keep some distance from their tank. Note that volatile energies also melee, so tanks should maintain aggro on them at all times. The Curator's next ability is Power Discharge, unleashing balls of lightning, 1 for each player. Each ball will fly and land at a player's location. Each player must dodge this ball or get instantly killed. The ball of lightning then lands, creating a pool of lightning that does damage. These pools do not disappear for the rest of the fight. You'll want to ration the room and move as a group to ensure that you'll have enough space for later portions of the fight. It is crucial that the group stacks to bait these lightnings and always move together as a group. Still, keep in mind the volatile energy's static charge. Don't stand within 8 yards of your tank while doing this. Finally, after the Curator uses up all his mana, he begins to cast Evocation. He first does this at around 40 seconds into the fight. He'll be stuck casting for 20 seconds. During this time, he will take 100% increased damage. You'll want to use all cooldowns here and Lust. At the end of Evocation, the boss's mana pool refills, and the fight begins again from the start. This fight is a race to see if you can kill the boss before you run out of space. If you manage your pools correctly, you can do a U-turn when you reach the end of the room, and have sufficient room to kill the boss, even if he manages to cast Evocation 4 times. And with that, you defeat Medivh and enter the next part of the dungeon. In the hallway to the next boss is an infused Pyromancer. Farther down the line is a Wrathguard Flamebringer. Both of these units I opt to skip as they are mightily difficult and more often than not lead to several deaths of party members. Should you choose to fight them, I'll briefly describe them. The infused Pyromancer is a mob you will see later on in the dungeon as well, though I also opt to skip them later on too. Their main ability is Fell Bomb, an instant cast ability which he does twice. Fell Bomb summons a bomb which does nothing for the moment. Leaving it alone will cause it to eventually explode and deal a lethal amount of damage to any player within about 100 yards. To prevent this, players will have to stand in these orbs, soaking them. Soaking them deals some damage to the players, so you'll have to be careful of that. The Pyromancers also summon Gleeful Immolators, which deal damage in a radius around them through Gleeful Immolation. And the Pyromancer's final ability is Fell Fireball, where they throw a fireball at a party member after a 3-second cast. You'll want to interrupt this. While fighting this Pyromancer, you'll also be surrounded by Fell Bats floating in the air, which bombard the platform with explosions. You'll want to avoid these too. As you can see, this Pyromancer is stacked, and is the reason I opt to skip it. As for the Flamebringer, their main ability is Slide, where they dash to behind a random player, not the tank, and will drop all threat. This resets the threat table, and they will immediately attack that player they teleported to. This is a potential one-shot at higher keys, a very good reason to avoid this mob. The Flamebringer also fights in a small checkered arena. Once in a while, flames will rise from the ground based on this checkered pattern. You'll want to avoid the tiles on fire. After skipping those 2 mobs, we immediately face the second boss, Shade of Medivh. Medivh only casts 3 normal abilities and 3 ultimate abilities. The first normal ability is Frostbite, where after 3 seconds, he does some damage and freezes a player permanently, rendering them unable to act while they are frozen. To free this player from Eternal Frost, the party should use Medivh's next ability, Inferno Bolt. He targets a random player, and after a 3-second cast unleashes a bolt of fire. The bolt of fire sets all players in a small radius around that player alight. This heat thaws the player out of their frozen prison. If someone happens to be frozen, you should free them by standing next to them. Otherwise, ensure that you're not near a teammate to reduce incoming damage. Finally, the boss casts Piercing Missiles, an ability where he throws several arcane missiles at your tank, dealing a significant amount of damage. This is actually the least dangerous ability among his arsenal, as the tank is designed to take high damage. If Medivh manages to fully cast Piercing Missiles, a debuff is applied to your tank, which makes them take 20% more damage from the next cast of Piercing Missiles for 20 seconds. All three of these normal abilities are interruptible. You'll want to interrupt all Frostbites, or as many as you can, to minimize DPS downtime. Because of this, you'll want to let all Inferno Bolts through, as you don't have enough interrupts to interrupt it all. Should the boss cast Piercing Missiles when the tank already has one stack of the debuff, then you might want to interrupt Piercing Missiles. Otherwise, use all kicks on Frostbites. Then, when Medivh reaches 100 energy, he casts one of 3 ultimates. Flame Wreath is where he summons 2 flame circles around 2 players. Should either player walk out of the circle or die within the circle, the wreath will explode, dealing lethal damage to the whole party. It will be a wipe. While standing in the wreaths, both players will take a fair amount of damage. Use defensives here, and healers keep them healed to avoid a wipe. If the boss casts an Inferno Bolt at either one of these targets, you'll want to kick Inferno Bolt here. His other ultimate is Ceaseless Winter, where the boss covers the area in frost. Every few seconds, a stack of Ceaseless Winter is applied to all players. It does fair damage and slows players by 5% per stack. To remove these stacks, the player will have to move. During Ceaseless Winter, all players will basically have to move for its duration. And finally, Guardian's Image is the boss's last ultimate, where he disappears and 3 Guardian Images appear in 3 corners of the room. The Guardian Images periodically cast Shimmer, which deal damage to all players and applies a stack of the Shimmer debuff, increasing player damage taken from future Shimmers by 3% per stack. This stacks and is cast by all Guardian Images. Because of this, you'll want to kill these Guardians as fast as possible. All players should immediately swap to the same Guardian Image and kill it rapidly. Throughout the phase, the Images also cast Arcane Bolt occasionally, dealing moderate arcane damage to that player. If possible, coordinate interrupts to ensure as few of these go off as possible. And that's the boss fight. By far, Flame Wreath is the most dangerous ability, dealing a significant amount of damage to the whole party, requiring your healer to pump hard. Be careful of this. After defeating the boss, you make your way downstairs and find yourself miniaturized and surrounded by rats, spiders, and magic books. I don't usually pull anything in this room except the 2 Nathrezim. However, I will run through these mobs very briefly. The rats poison your tank and let loose an army of rats that deal a lot of damage. The rat army moves in formation, but they have a few holes to sneak through. Don't die. The spiders periodically cast Leech Life, draining life from their target. The spider also throws a web at a player, rooting and dealing damage to them. The books cast Arcane Blast, dealing damage to the tank. They also cast Consume Magic, healing them to full. Interrupt this. Finally, they cast Curse of Doom, dealing lethal damage to a player after 10 seconds. Decurse this. And finally, the third boss itself. The Mana Devourer starts the fight by spawning a puddle of magic. Standing in the puddle deals minor damage to the player. The Mana Devourer occasionally drops arcane bombs on the party, large AoEs that deal damage to players that stand in them. Dodge these. The Mana Devourer also periodically drains their energy, throwing that energy out as balls of energy through Coalesce Power. Each ball represents 5 energy. Should these balls reach the boss will regain that energy. Should the boss reach 100 energy, the boss will cast Decimating Essence, instantly wiping the whole party. Players are able to soak these balls of energy, gaining a stack of Unstable Mana. Unstable Mana deals consistent damage to the player throughout its infinite duration. Unstable Mana also grants the player a 10% damage increase per stack. To remove these stacks, players should walk into these puddles of magic from earlier, dispelling 1 stack for every few seconds you stand in these puddles. You'll want to dispel these stacks frequently and keep your health topped off for the boss's next ability. At regular intervals, the boss casts Energy Discharge, unleashing a devastating energy blast to all party members within 100 yards, dealing a large amount of unavoidable damage. It's for this reason the healers will need to keep the DPS topped up. To emphasize, you need to soak orbs so that the boss doesn't get to 100 energy. And that's the whole fight. Once you've beaten the Mana Devourer, you can grow back to normal size and can commit Mana Devourer Genocide. A cute little trivia is that the Mana Devourer boss gives 3 count, unlike most bosses that give 0. This is because Mana Devourers are actually trash mobs, but because we were tiny, they were like a boss to us. When the Devourers are tiny, they only have 2 abilities. They release balls of energy just like the boss. Should any ball reach them, they immediately cast Absorb Mana, unleashing a devastating explosion that deals a fair amount of damage to the whole party. Just like with the boss, you can soak these balls of energy. Pulling too many of these Devourers result in a significant number of balls. If too many get through, it could be a party wipe. Pull with caution. I don't recommend pulling more than 2 packs at a time. After the Mana Devourers, you cross a hallway with more fell bats and a few familiar mobs. An Erudite Slayer and an infused Pyromancer. The Erudite Slayer casts Heavy Smash, creating a zone of fell energy that pulls all players into its center. The Slayer also casts Mighty Swing, swinging forwards, knocking back all players hit. The infused Pyromancer is the same from earlier. I opt to skip all this. An invisibility potion can take you all the way through to the end of the hallway. And now we get to play chess. You enter the chess room and you cannot use abilities unless you're on the chessboard. Your goal here is the same as ever, to kill the king. The king is invulnerable for most of the fight. To bring him out of his invulnerability, you'll want to kill his minions. Killing any of the king's minions results in the king's vulnerability for 20 seconds. As such, you'll want to kill the weakest ones first. Knights have the lowest health, followed by the bishops, then the rooks, and finally the queen. You'll want to focus them in that order. Knights move in an L shape and explode other tiles an L shape away from their landing square. They also deal damage in a circular AoE around their landing square, so don't be in melee range of the knight's landing square. Bishops move diagonally and explode other tiles diagonally from their landing square. Rooks move orthogonally and explode other tiles orthogonally from their landing square. Queens do what bishops and rooks do, combined into one piece. The king attacks all squares adjacent to him, so don't be adjacent to him unless he is vulnerable and stunned. Standing in most explosions from these mobs will kill you, so just don't stand in them. The queen has a significant amount of health, so try to ensure that you don't have to kill the queen to kill the king. This means planning your cooldowns and preparing to burst the king when he becomes open. And after defeating the king, you make your way to the final boss room. The final boss is Viz'aduum the Watcher, by far the easiest boss in Upper Karazhan. Viz'aduum starts the fight by casting Burning Blast on his target, the tank. You can either interrupt this or dispel it off the tank. Both are valid options. The boss then casts Disintegrate, a 6-second channel where he lets out a beam as a frontal. It knocks players back. It's very easy to dodge, so just sidestep it. The boss also commands his ship to laser focus on one player. It spawns a beam, which follows that player and leaves behind bad fell stuff. Just avoid it and try not to bring it to teammates. The boss then commands his ship to bombard the party, throwing large circles all around the area. You'll want to dodge these circles. He also casts Chaotic Shadows, applying a magic debuff on 2 players. When the debuff times out or is dispelled, a whole set of purple balls will exit from that player. If you have this debuff, move to the side so your party has more time to dodge these purple balls. At 66% health, The boss phases and opens a portal to a nearby Legion ship. Take the portal and move onwards to the second phase of the fight. The second phase of the fight starts with the party making their way across the ship. The boss stands at the end casting Disintegrate. You'll want to sidestep these disintegrates as he casts them. On this ship, there are pylons shooting lightning. Don't walk into the lightning. Once you reach him, the fight continues. In Phase 2, he continues to cast all abilities he cast in Phase 1. At 33%, the boss phases once again, and you move to the last Legion ship. This time the boss spends a solid 30 seconds casting the ultimate ability, Stabilize Rift. To either side of the boss are portals which endlessly spawn Felguard sentries. These sentries are not very threatening, though they do apply a debuff to the tank, which makes them take damage over time and slows the tank. This can be dispelled by the healer. If the boss finishes his cast, he will spawn these sentries at a more rapid rate. So you make your way to the boss on the third platform, with your tank picking up the sentries on guard along the way. Everyone will want to hold their interrupts here, and make sure you only interrupt at the very last second of his channel. This allows you to DPS the boss with very little worries about the other mechanics. Then, after you interrupt the boss, the fight resumes with the boss casting all his abilities from P1 and P2, with exception of Bombard, as there are no other ships left to bombard with. And that's the whole fight and dungeon. I hope you look forward to doing the dungeon itself. I know it can be intimidating playing Mythic Plus, especially if you aren't caught up with all the dungeon mechanics. I hope this video taught you something new about Upper Karazhan. I plan on making a guide for all other Season 4 dungeons too, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch those. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next dungeon guide.